A freezing wind swept across the desolate churchyard of Ettrick, carrying with it the desperate strains of a dying man's voice. Outside, hundreds of rural Scottish labourers stood shivering. Their eyes were locked on the open window of the nearby parish manse. Inside, propped up in bed by sheer force of will, was Thomas Boston, preaching his final sermons. He preached into the open air because his broken body could no longer carry him to the pulpit. This stark image caps one of the most paradoxically powerful lives. It was a ministry defined not by sprawling stadiums or academic chairs, but by deep personal tragedy, systemic isolation, and an unshakable dedication to an obscure rural Scottish flock. The history of the Christian church is frequently told through the biographies of its most towering, visible figures, those who stood on metropolitan stages and commanded universities in Edinburgh. They directed the course of international movements. Yet a profound distortion occurs when church history ignores the rural landscapes where the grit of pastoral ministry is actually forged. Thomas Boston offers a corrective to this narrative. Historically dubbed the heartbroken pastor of Ettrick, Boston represents a paradigm of ministry where profound theological rigor coexisted with suffering. He faced staggering personal and ecclesiastical suffering throughout his life. He founded no global organizations and occupied no academic chairs. Instead, his life unfolded in remote Scottish parishes. The enduring significance of Boston lies in the manner by which his theology was chiseled out of the bedrock of real-world distress and heavy trials in Scotland. His works, most notably Human Nature in its fourfold state, did not emerge from a detached ivory tower, but from a damp manse filled with heavy grief and pain. The manse was filled with the cries of dying infants and the quiet anguish of a chronically ill wife, impacting Thomas Boston deeply in his ministry at Ettrick. By exploring the intersection of his deeply rooted theological convictions and his localized pastoral labor, one discovers a model of ministry that values internal faithfulness over external prominence. His life demonstrates that the true measure of a theological legacy is not the scale of its institutional footprint, but its depth in Scotland's local churches. It is measured by the depth to which it infuses the ordinary, broken realities of the human condition with the ultimate hope of the gospel across Ettrick. Thomas Boston's theological resilience was forged in the religious and political turmoil of late 17th century Scotland. He was born on March 17, 1676, in Duns, Berwickshire. Boston grew up in a devout Presbyterian family facing severe persecution. A defining childhood memory was visiting his father imprisoned for anti-prelatic convictions in Scotland. This pivotal visit taught young Thomas Boston that unshakable truth required absolute personal commitment, regardless of severe personal cost or social opposition in Berwickshire. His personal spiritual awakening occurred in the summer of 1687 through the outlawed open-air preaching of Covenanter Henry Erskine in the quiet countryside of Berwickshire. This was not a sudden emotional shift, but the culmination of deep conviction over personal sin, such as breaking the Sabbath and stealing a biblical commentary. He also felt an acute awareness of mortality sparked by seeing a corpse. Henry Erskine's preaching transformed these deep anxieties into a profound realization of divine grace. The outlawed open-air setting underscored that the gospel was worth following beyond state-sanctioned boundaries, grounding Thomas Boston's faith in sin and redemption in Scotland. Clarifying his calling, Thomas Boston matriculated at Edinburgh University in 1691, earning his Master of Arts in 1694 before pursuing further theological training in Scotland. Though his formal university divinity training lasted only 4 months, with the rest supervised directly by his local presbytery, he developed a rigorous, disciplined intellect. Thomas Boston mastered Greek, Hebrew, Latin, French, and Dutch. Rather than pursuing academic prestige, he viewed linguistic and theological fluency as essential pastoral tools in Scotland. He used these tools to defend his future congregations from error and make deep theological truths accessible to everyday believers living throughout his local parishes in Scotland. In 1699, Thomas Boston was ordained in the tiny parish of Simprin, Berwickshire. Rather than a sanctuary of piety, he encountered widespread spiritual apathy and ignorance. Bound by conviction of personal accountability, Boston refused to lower standards. He instituted intensive catechetical instruction and home visitations across his rural parish in Berwickshire. In July 1700, Thomas Boston married Catherine Brown, a union marked by mutual affection but severe trial, including the agonizing loss of 6 infant children. Catherine Brown developed chronic physical and psychological illness, sinking into debilitating depression that confined her to a manse apartment Boston called the Inner Prison in Scotland. Acting as her husband, nurse, and defender, Thomas Boston anchored his loftiest theological convictions on faith directly in the context of her deep psychological suffering in Simprin. Boston navigated these relentless trials through a structured discipline of intercessory prayer. With every bereavement, he deliberately asked God to fill space left empty in his heart. Processing his private heartbreak through communion with God infused his preaching with rare empathetic authority. Ultimately, Boston's suffering equipped him to offer authentic comfort to a broken world. His ministry was marked by profound, heartfelt compassion, chiseled directly out of personal sorrow, giving Thomas Boston a lasting legacy throughout the small rural parishes of Scotland. In 1707, Thomas Boston moved to the isolated border parish of Ettrick, entering an environment marked by moral disorder, divisive local factions, and persistent social resistance. The harsh geography and biting climate compounded these challenges, resulting in a decade of labor with little visible fruit across the cold, isolated hills of Ettrick, Scotland. Isolated from academic centers, Boston even faced ridicule from a visiting minister over his sparse library. Rather than succumbing to shame, he deepened his study of scriptures. He used this painful isolation to deepen his understanding of the Bible and focus his pastoral heart entirely on serving the local flock in Ettrick, Scotland. Boston's ministry was sustained through constant psychological melancholy and severe physical suffering. Believing these afflictions were sovereignly designed to prevent pride, he maintained public ministry. Defying bodily decay, he systematically covered his 100-square-mile mountainous parish on horseback, visiting every single household twice a year throughout his decades of service in Ettrick. He paired pulpit preaching with intimate catechetical instruction, driven by a deep, unwavering passion to shepherd every single laborer under his pastoral charge in Ettrick, Scotland. Boston's pastoral determination culminated at his life's end in 1732. Bedridden and unable to walk to church, he had the manse windows opened for his people. Hundreds of villagers gathered in the freezing kirkyard below. He preached his final sermons from his deathbed through the open window frame, using his failing voice. He served his beloved parish faithfully until his death on May 20th, 1732, leaving behind a lasting legacy of true pastoral care across Ettrick, Scotland. The engine behind Thomas Boston's public endurance was a rigorously cultivated interior life. Refusing hollow performance, he dedicated every Monday morning to prayer and self-examination. He brought every domestic trial, sermon preparation, and pastoral conflict to God through constant prayer, regular fasting, and private communion in his study in Ettrick, Scotland. These hidden spiritual disciplines stripped away all self-reliance, ensuring his public work flowed from a deep reservoir of personal intimacy with God throughout his life in Scotland. This hidden devotion created an unmistakable aura of holiness in the pulpit. His congregation recognized his preaching was the authentic overflow of a deeply tested relationship. This allowed him to serve as both an authoritative heavenly ambassador and a compassionate friend to the poorest laborer in Ettrick, leaving a lasting spiritual legacy. By his death, Thomas Boston's name became synonymous with genuine holiness across Scotland, transforming rural pastoral ministry through his unwavering personal devotion and public labor. Historian D.D.F. MacDonald noted that Boston's localized, prayer-soaked preaching did more to ignite true piety in Scotland than any other minister of his generation. Guided by the conviction that preaching must be plain, useful, searching, and safe, Thomas Boston viewed homiletical clarity as an absolute moral imperative in Scotland. To achieve this without sacrificing depth, Thomas Boston paired an intricate scholastic framework with intense emotional weight, favoring deep, piercing feeling over empty rhetorical flourish. A central strategy was his relentless use of targeted repetition to shatter human pride and the persistent illusion of self-righteousness among his congregation in Ettrick. Boston argued that outward morality is no substitute for saving grace, insisting that moral churchgoers need Jesus Christ just as urgently as overt sinners do. Stripping away the false security of mere religious routine, Thomas Boston forced his listeners to confront their absolute, immediate need for vital union with Christ. In 1712, Thomas Boston compiled his Sermons into Human Nature in its fourfold state, officially published in 1720 to translate his pastoral counseling into literature. The classic work outlines four distinct theological epochs: the state of innocence as original righteousness, followed by the fall as man's thoroughly corrupt nature. It progresses to the state of grace as man redeemed and regenerated, and concludes with eternity as humanity's ultimate state in either heaven or hell. Thomas Boston designed this framework to shatter self-righteousness, warning that one cannot travel toward heaven without first confronting their fallen nature in Scotland. Hammered out amid acute grief over infant mortality and political distress, Thomas Boston's theology was never abstract, birthing the crook in the lot. Boston argued that God intentionally places a permanent crook or trial in every life to level human pride and foster absolute reliance on Christ. Forged in actual affliction, these devotional works deeply shaped Scottish evangelical spirituality for generations, offering comfort across the parishes of Scotland. Thomas Boston's theological convictions brought direct conflict with the Church of Scotland after discovering Edward Fisher's The Marrow of Modern Divinity in a parishioner's cottage. Championing its republication in 1718, Boston ignited the Marrow controversy, emphasizing the free, unrestricted offer of the gospel to all sinners across Scotland. Opponents led by Principal James Haddo argued limited atonement precluded a universal offer, leading the General Assembly to ban the Marrow in 1720. Navigating this ecclesiastical pressure, Thomas Boston maintained that foundational assurance is necessary to trust Christ, though mature assurance develops over a lifetime. Facing ecclesiastical censure, Thomas Boston and his fellow allies steadfastly refused to alter their preaching, continuing to declare the free, unrestricted grace of God. This unflinching stand laid the groundwork for the First Secession of 1733, proving Boston's ultimate loyalty belonged to biblical truth rather than church hierarchy. Thomas Boston's political courage was severely tested during the crises surrounding the Oath of Abjuration in 1712 and 1719, mandated directly by the British Crown. Mandated to secure allegiance, the oath implicitly forced Scottish ministers to approve Anglican oversight, which Thomas Boston viewed as an unbiblical intrusion on Jesus Christ's headship. Facing threats of prosecution, asset seizure, and imprisonment, Boston published a pointed pamphlet outlining his nonconformity, risking total material ruin for church independence in Scotland. This defiance alienated him from political elites, but vastly elevated his moral authority among ordinary Scottish citizens who deeply admired his unwavering commitment to truth. At the 1728 General Assembly in Edinburgh, delegates sought a quiet compromise regarding Professor John Simpson, who faced severe charges of dangerous Arian heresy. While the majority remained silent to preserve institutional peace, Thomas Boston stood completely alone to lodge a formal protest against the General Assembly's leniency. Recognizing that unity bought by compromising truth was a betrayal of the gospel, Thomas Boston proved his courage was independent of peer approval or political expedience. Thomas Boston translated the Westminster Confession's doctrine of adoption into an experiential reality, grounding prayer in the believer's legal standing as a beloved child of God. This truth served as his primary defense against severe personal trauma, including infant loss and his wife Catherine Brown's chronic, debilitating mental illness in Ettrick. Rather than viewing suffering as divine anger, his assurance of God's fatherly love framed trials as loving discipline, enabling him to maintain intimate prayer amidst heartbreak. Though devoted to Ettrick, Boston actively served the broader Presbyterian system, viewing presbyterial duties as vital for preserving theological purity and church order across Scotland. Recognized for administrative diligence, he served as clerk of the Synod of Merse and Teviotdale and attended the General Assembly, giving rural parishes a national voice. Thomas Boston's commitment to gospel truth deeply shaped his household as his eldest son, Thomas Boston Jr., entered the ministry carrying his father's passion for doctrine. Facing increasing state encroachment and patronage, Thomas Boston Jr. took a bold step his father never did, officially leaving the established Church of Scotland. He became a primary founder of the Relief Church, providing relief to congregations burdened by forced appointments and cementing his father's enduring legacy of biblical principle. The ultimate significance of Thomas Boston lies in the vast disparity between the smallness of his earthly platform and the enduring magnitude of his historical footprint in Scotland. Within his lifetime, Thomas Boston operated with immense spiritual might inside a small, isolated parish, laboring through decades of intense opposition, physical frailty, and grief. Thomas Boston never sought the public limelight, consistently refused the security of institutional advancement, and never occupied a prestigious university chair in major cities like Edinburgh. Yet, the books chiseled out of rural isolation became profound commentaries, with his illustration of the Westminster Shorter Catechism celebrated as one of its most lucid expositions. Throughout his career, Thomas Boston exemplified absolute reverence for God, unshakable confidence in Scripture, theological simplicity, deep respect for sacraments, and concern for church purity. His life provides a vital corrective to modern metrics of success, proving that the deepest wells of spiritual influence are frequently dug in obscure, localized affliction in Scotland. His humble circumstances make him a valuable model. Thomas Boston founded no organization, led no massive movement, and pastored only a small local church in Ettrick. The life of Thomas Boston challenges us to reconsider how we evaluate the true impact of our labor, examining the hidden, quiet motives of our own hearts. Are you striving to build an impressive institutional footprint, or are you content to be a faithful witness in the quiet, broken realities of your immediate surroundings? What crook in your lot is God currently using to level your human pride and drive you closer to the ultimate hope found at the cross? Join us next week as we continue our journey into the hidden furnaces of church history, diving into the brief but luminous life of Robert Murray McCheyne. We will explore a ministry that burned with intense passion, proving a life entirely consumed by God can leave an indelible mark on Scotland, however quickly. To ensure you never miss an episode of these deep biographical studies, click the link below to subscribe to the channel for more robust, time-tested truth. Join a growing community dedicated to uncovering history and turn on notifications to walk alongside us as we unpack the lives and theology of faithful pastors.